Hey, I want to let you know, several of you have asked, and yes, we recorded those breakouts, and they will be made available at gatewayleaders.com. Not today. We're going to edit them, fix them up a little bit for you, but gatewayleaders.com. And what we're going to do next in this next session, several of the questions that were coming up in the breakouts in between were kind of, give me something that helps me know how to move forward. And so John's going to take this next section to really talk through creating community, lost to leading, and have some real life examples you'll get to hear from. And then we'll have, at the end of the day, the last 45 minutes to an hour will be with Erwin and John, and then we'll explain about tonight. So it's going to be really, really good. You'll have a big, long dinner so you can process. So push through. These next 2 hours are going to be really meaningful. So welcome back. He's already here. Give it up, John Burke.
Yeah. Okay. So for those of you wired like me, ENTJs, who like process or structure or something linear, I'm going to give you a circle. So it's kind of a process, but it goes around and around. All right. So what I want to talk about is, let's say that you are a church planter, or maybe you're a part of a church, and you want to start engaging the culture. What might you do? And I want to talk about some of the aspects of what we did starting Gateway, but also what we're doing for those of you who are around here with starting networks and trying to get ordinary Christians pushing out in the world, actually engaging the world around them. Is Mark, are you here? Is Mark still here? Mark and I went surfing this summer. There he is. Mark and I went surfing this summer in San Diego. He was nice enough to lend me his board. And I love surfing. And, waves are very interesting because waves actually are energy moving through water, but the water doesn't actually move very much. Ever thought about that? It's this powerful force moving through these molecules, but actually the molecules just go in circles. They bump into each other, and they form these circles that grow and get bigger and bigger as it goes around and around, and this energy, this force, moves through the water as a result. And I want to suggest that in many ways, that is, can we get it on these side screens? That graphic? That is what a process that we need to put in place in the church. That as people, as Christians, move in relationship together, around and around, in this process I'm going to talk about, what happens is the wind of the Spirit of God blows across us together, and this builds energy. So that's what I want to talk through with you. And this is did they all go away all of a sudden? Uh-oh. Oh, you did? Oh. So they basically what I want to talk about is that this is really what Jesus was doing. That he was helping ordinary people work together and move together relationally in such a way that the energy of the Holy Spirit working through them just kept adding molecules to that, and the wave got larger and larger. And I think you can see the same thing happen today. So Jesus expects ordinary people to do extraordinary things, right? And that's what he was doing. If you think about Jesus' ministry, he started off first year, go on to that next one. First year, he just said, come follow me, right? They came up to him, where are you staying? Come and see. And people were coming to see for a whole year. And he was teaching them, he was healing, he was doing these things. And they're like, what do you think? Do you think he's the Messiah? I don't know. What do you think? And then second year, he calls a few to be equipped. So he's teaching in large groups, and he calls a small group to be equipped. Third year, he calls them to ministry. Now he sends them out to engage the world, right? First 12, and then 70, and then finally he gives the Great Commission 3.5 years later to about 120, and it's the call to multiply. So he says, now what I have done with you, this wave of energy that you have created, now I'm empowering you because all authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. So you can now go and lead people to faith, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to observe all that I've commanded. Why? Because I'm with you always. So it's by his authority, and he's always with them, and he's always with you. So we can all do this, right? So Jesus expects every ordinary Christian to be about this. And that's what we've got to start seeing. That is maturity. We got to change the definition of maturity. You know, remember when Jesus led the woman at the well to faith, and they came and they said, "Hey, here, Jesus, eat something." And he said, "I've got food to eat that you know nothing about." He said, "My food is to do the will of the one who sent me and to complete his work." And you know, you say that the harvest is 4 months off. I say, open your eyes. It's ripe all around you. And already those who are reaping and sowing are reaping a crop for eternal life. That wasn't just for a select few. That's for every maturing Christ follower. So we got to change the definition of maturity. All right, so I think you can start off by just building a commissioned core. So we're all, as Christ followers, we are co-missioned with Jesus, right? We've been co-missioned. So if you are a church planter or you're leading a church, just get a core group of people together who get that, all right? And you start helping them see that, okay, what is our context? So who are the people around us that God is calling us to reach, to serve, to love? Who are those people? What are they like? Start praying for them. Start talking to them. Start figuring out, who are these people? What language do they speak? That's a lot of what Erwin is saying. You got to get your heart in tune with their heart, right? What things matter to them? How do we build bridges of the gospel? And then clarity is figuring out, all right, now we know a little bit more about these people. Now, what are we going to do together? How are we going to engage them? How are we going to serve them? How are we going to love them? All right? So you can start with, it can be 2 people. It can be a small group of people. It could be a class of people. Doesn't matter. But you start with a core that says, all right, we are going on mission with Jesus. We're going into the world together. And then you start this process. All right, so first of all, what did Jesus do? Well, he built relationship and he created community, right? So you build relational momentum with the world around you, with those that you feel called to engage and serve. I mean, you think about it. Jesus went to dinner parties. He went to weddings. You know, Matthew throws a party with all his lost, crazy sinner friends. Jesus shows up. He goes, right? So he's engaging with people. Steve and Joanne were supposed to be here today. They planted a church in San Antonio. They went through Cultivate, and they had an adopt a block vision from the very beginning. And Steve said, you know, we basically got everybody in our church to say, all right, we live on our block or in our apartment complex for a reason. So we're going to adopt these people as our own, to pray for, to serve, to love, to get to know. And they did. And so they had their neighbor, they got to know their neighbors. They wrote down their names and memorized their names. They listened. They found out about them. They went to their parties. They invited them over to their house for parties, for barbecues. And at one party, Steve and Joanne ran into Simon and Terry. Now, Simon and Terry wanted nothing to do with Jesus at all, and nothing to do with church. But Steve and Simon found out they both loved Xterra mountain bike racing. And so they spent the night talking about mountain bike wipeouts, and they decided to ride together. So they start riding together, okay? So they're riding bikes together and just building a friendship, and Steve invites a few of his other Christian friends, some of the guys that are in his small group, to come mountain bike riding with him. So they're mountain biking together, and then he invites Simon and Terry over to their house, and they had dinner some, and then he invites a few of their Christian couple friends over, and so they're getting to know them. And so this is happening, and for about 3 or 4 months, they're riding bikes together. And notice, though, that Simon is now getting to know a few of Joanne and Steve's Christian friends, right? About 4 or 5 months into it, he said, hey, you want to come and serve with us? The church was doing a serving project in the inner city, throwing parties for kids in need. And Simon and Terry said, that sounds cool, yeah. So they go and they serve with them. And every month that they went and did that, they started going and serving with them. So now they're getting to know these Christians, so they don't even really realize it. They've served with Christians. And then after about 6 months, Steve said to Simon, hey, Simon, we've got this small group that meets and we talk about spiritual things. You and Terry want to come? And Simon said, and he said to him, he said, most of the people in the group. That's key. You already know most of the people in the group. See, because they had been building relational momentum. And he said, yeah, I think so. So they show up at the first small group, and there Terry admits while they're in the small group that she can't even fathom of a God who's a loving father, because she was born out of a one-night stand and was abused as a kid and just thought, how could there be a loving God? And then Simon said, his brother became a Christian and was just so obnoxious about it that they just said, leave me alone with that. So clearly they weren't in a good place. And yet the small group didn't try to pounce on him and quickly fix it and make it all right. They just listened, cared. And on the way home, later, Simon said that he had said to Terry, they didn't go all Ned Flanders on us. If that keeps up, I think I could keep going to this. And they did keep going. And they kept going. So now, they haven't been to church yet, okay? But they're riding bikes together. They're eating dinner with others. They're serving with the church. They're in a small group with the church. And then finally, they started attending the church as well because their hearts were opening. They were learning. 18 months later, Simon and Terry were baptized for faith in Jesus in their own jacuzzi. Now, here's the amazing thing, though. In that process, they were bringing her mother, his mother-in-law, and 2 neighbors along all the way throughout. See? Because there was a process and there was relational space where people could move along, and so they just naturally invited their friends. It was like, this is really cool. Why wouldn't you want to come? See that? So you got to start by building relational momentum. When we planted the church, we got to know all of our neighbors. Of our 10 neighbors, 5 of those families ended up coming to our church and coming to faith and getting baptized and getting in groups and all that. I started coaching soccer, my son's soccer team. During 10 years of coaching soccer, we saw 24 people baptized. Not in the name of soccer, in the name of Jesus. So what do you love to do? Engage relationally with people. And then, like I said, help them meet your friends as well. Help them experience loving community with Christians. Okay? So that's the first question you need to think through the answer to. How will we create relational momentum with those outside the church? You need to answer that question somehow. You need to answer it for you in your neighborhood or the relationships God's already put around you. And then as you're leading others, you got to help them think about that. How are we going to do that? The second thing is serve. Serve your neighbors with your neighbors. So Jesus said he came not to be served, but to serve, right? All the way to giving his life. And so we've got to think about that as well. How do we actually serve people, but we can also invite them to serve people with us? And both work well. Both work well. If you weren't in Brian and Amy's seminar, I'm going to tell you their story because I think it's so cool. Brian and Amy sitting right here, 6 years ago? They were in a church and pretty much have been told you can serve coffee. Was it coffee? So you can serve coffee. And they were like, okay, so we'll serve coffee. So they're serving coffee. And this is the thing I want you to realize is God can do so much more through so many people who they're not being challenged to all that God has for them, right? So they're serving coffee, and they were having a problem with one of their daughters and thought, we need to help her get outside of herself. So they found out there was this dinner being served to homeless people in a motel, people who basically worked in the entertainment industry in Branson, but had to live in motels. They didn't have homes, but they were trying to make it. So they go and they serve. The next year, they decided to go back, and no one was hosting the dinner. And Brian felt the Lord say to him, you do it. And you resisted, right? And resisted. And then finally said, all right, once. And so he and his family threw this dinner for these people at this one motel and got to know all these families, and it broke their heart. Like, these are just ordinary people trying to make it and struggling along. And so they came back the next week and gave them what they call happy meals, just a little meal and how you doing? And then some people said, why don't you, these people down a few tenants down, they could use one of these. And so they started bringing it to them, and they had to recruit people to help them. And before you know it, they were serving all kinds of people. And during that time, started having spiritual conversations and realized these people need God, but they don't think the church will have anything to do with them. And somehow we got in touch, and they came to our first Cultivate thing like this and stayed in touch. And anyway, over the last 5 years, just continuing to serve these people in the motels. And then I think a key thing is then right away turning around and getting them to serve others too. And then helping them enter into this process not only of relational momentum, but experiencing who Jesus is and learning about who Jesus is. And now they've got 150 homeless people, basically, who have their own church. Just went to 2 services. Serve how many thousand meals last year? 52,000 meals served to almost every motel in, how many motels now are you guys in? 26 motels. Hundreds of people serving every week. They have a jobs program that's helping people learn dignity of work and get on their feet and get better jobs. Now, here's the crazy thing, is they were doing this just as volunteers with other jobs for years. In fact, Brian just went full-time a month ago. But he was managing 3 cell phone stores. See, God expects ordinary Christians to do extraordinary things by his power. But we got to help them see. We got to help them see and move out trusting him, right? So getting people engaged, serving, and then even those you're serving, helping them serve others. It helps them realize, wow, I can be a part of this, and I can actually add something of value. We saw this early on, that we would get people who didn't believe squat about Jesus, but we'd say, hey, well, you can fold chairs, right? Come help us. And they became a part. And that makes a huge difference, even in this process of people coming to faith. Okay? So, second question, how will I or we serve our neighbors, even with our neighbors? How are we going to do that? How are we going to engage? Personally, I listen to their story. I find ways to meet their needs. I think about Melissa and her neighbor, and she's a part of a network, and she started to see, correct me if I tell this wrong, because I'm just making it up on the fly. But you saw your neighbor's yard was kind of overgrown, and one day out mowing and just decided, I'm just going to mow their yard. And then found out it was because the wife got cancer. The husband was a bar owner down on 6th Street, and he was just stretched thin trying to get the kids to school and her to chemo and all that. And then you got your network to serve them, right? So she gets this network of Christians to go and serve them. And long story short, the woman with cancer and her daughter started coming. They got in your small group, didn't they? And came to faith. So you see how the process, how it all works together. Okay. Then, leading people to faith. Now, here's the thing. I mean, God can use anything, and definitely sharing our faith is a part of that, and we need to. We need to be open and honest about our faith. One of the things I've seen, like playing sports especially, like on my soccer team, is after a little bit of time, you set up a social contract. So like if I start playing soccer, or I have others playing soccer, and I never let them know that I'm a follower of Jesus, it's not natural to talk about that, pretty soon a social contract gets set in place where that's not cool. We don't do that. But on soccer teams that I've been a part of, where just from the beginning, I wasn't pushy about it or anything, but I was just honest about who I am and my faith. And they started calling me Father Burke, so it's okay for them to push at me. But that was all right. And that set up a social contract where actually, like Jose calls me still anytime he has a crisis in his life. I'm his pastor. He doesn't go to church, but I'm the closest thing he's got, right? So you set up a social contract in this. You got to think about that as well. So leading people to faith, where are we going to create space where people can come as they are and learn? And it's sometimes 6 to 18 months. Now see, here's the deal. In our culture, where most people know about Jesus is what they learned on The Simpsons, honestly, I mean, they really don't know much about him. You realize that? They don't know who's in the Bible and who's not, really. They've never read it. They think it's a book of myths. So they're going to have to learn. Now, where are they going to be allowed to come with their struggles and their questions and their doubts and learn? And I want to suggest that your church service can be something like that really pretty easily if you just let them know that it's okay that they're there. So when you're talking about something, if you just simply say, now I know there's some of you here who don't believe this yet, or you address their resistance. I know some of you might have doubts about that. It's all right. We're just glad you're here. When you just do that, you just welcome them and let them know you get them, it lowers the barrier. In fact, let me show you a video by Christy. Christy, it was like 5 years in. And here's the thing, you always end up turning inward. You always start addressing the people who are already there and forgetting about the people who are yet to come. And we had started to do that. We had started to get our own gravity and just turn inward. And she came to me and said, hey, you're forgetting about me and my friends. Now, so she's in process still. And I heard her and I said, can we capture that on video? Because I think we all need to hear this. So watch this.
When I first came to Gateway, my feeling on Christianity and about church was very skeptical. I sort of would get scared off by churches that talked just too much in an evangelical tone, or even just kind of talked about Jesus and God too much. So I was really pretty standoffish towards church at that time. The first service that we came to, a friend of ours invited us, and I remember Ted was giving the service, and it was about doubters and how doubters are welcome here. And, I remember just thinking, wow, this is really just speaking to me. And if there ever was a doubter who should be in church on a Sunday, it's me. And here it was. So we started coming, we being my husband and I, we started coming kind of regularly and really enjoyed the services on Sunday. Mostly because the tone of the service seems to be very kind of low-key and sort of all-accepting. I do think that our faith has been affected by being here, both mine and my husband's. Like I said, when I first came, I was really doubting and questioning and didn't know what to think of anything. At this point, I'm happy to say that I have a church that I call my church home, which is a big step for me. I also, once a week on Sundays, come to church and set aside that time with my husband to really think about God's role in my life and Jesus Christ and what his role is in my life and who I am as a person and who I want to be as a person, and to set some goals for myself. Here's what I don't want Gateway to change, and here's what I think is so special about Gateway. It is a church that opens its arms and welcomes people who don't even know if they're Christians, who don't even know if there's a God, who might think that Jesus Christ, was a great teacher, who maybe are questioning everything. But those people might not be able to find any other church that would make them feel welcome. And to me, those people more than anyone need a church. So to me, that is what is so exciting about Gateway, and that's the secret that Gateway has that is so special, that I don't want to see changed, and that makes me want to invite my friends here.
Now, here's the thing. She had 20 of her friends sitting around her, and some of them came to faith before she did. And her husband came to faith, and then she finally came to faith. And so what you realize is they need time and space to figure it out. So where are you going to give them time and space to figure it out? You got to answer that question as well. Where are we going to give them where our non-Christian friends can learn the essentials of following Christ? And where we share the good news of God's heart for people, what he wants for them. All right, and then you got to grow and equip leaders. So you got to grow and equip people so that they can turn around and multiply. It's the Great Commission, right? And from the very beginning, we have had the idea in this process that we want to help people move out, but we always want to be developing leaders who will connect to a few, right? Connect to, it might be 2 or 3 that they disciple. It might be 8 to 15 that they disciple. But those leaders, that's where you got to hold your bar. You got to make sure you lead your leaders well and make sure they really are following Jesus and fully surrendered to Jesus, because they really are the pastors of the church. They're really the ones in the people's lives, right? Helping them work through these things, helping them get in the scriptures, helping them know how to really respond to God's Holy Spirit. And so that is what we've been doing in our small groups and our spiritual running partners, and we have a whole process of spiritual formation that's outcome-based. You can go look at it on lifegroups.gatewaychurch.com. If you went to Rick Shirt's seminar, he was probably talking all about that, because our Grow pastors developed that. But you've got to have that whole process, and it keeps going, right? And it's not as linear as you think. Things happen at different times. It's not like first you do this and then you do that, but you're continually doing all of it, and you see God do something in people. I want to let you hear from several people who have gone from lost to following Jesus, and in some cases leading others, okay? So I want you to hear a little bit of their story, and then we'll ask Erwin back up. So TJ and Melissa, you guys would come up. I'll give you these seats.
TJ.
Huh?
Am I TJ?
You're TJ. No, you're not TJ. Where's TJ? There's TJ. Come on over, TJ.
Hello. Okay.
Do you guys have mics? They have mics?
Hello. Hi.
They need mics?
Hello.
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 What?
Hello.
Oh, okay. You guys can share. Okay.
Check, Niner.
So, why don't you tell us, and since there are 3 of you, kind of soundbite, but when you think about going from lost to following Jesus to, leading others, where did you come from, when you first encountered Gateway? Where were you coming from?
I grew up Church of Christ and grew up having just a complete understanding that God was a very angry God, and that if I didn't do everything in certain linear order, he would be very mad at me. And so just completely gave myself to him as much as I knew at that point, and lived that life. Went to private Christian university, and at the age of 26 had some family stuff blow up, and I said, well, screw the family and screw God, I'm done. And I walked away from God because I was mad at him. I had tried to do everything that I knew to make him happy, and still things didn't work out. So I went into just doing everything that I knew naturally in my flesh to be what I wanted. I went into the gay lifestyle, so I'm that person you guys are talking about. And so for the next 8 years, I was just in the gay lifestyle and threw myself into work. And the beautiful thing about running after the wrong thing is eventually you run out of gas. And so I came to Gateway because I saw a sign driving by, because I knew I kind of had this moment where when was the last time I was happy? And it was when I had some semblance of God. So I drove by Gateway and saw their sign, and they were doing a 5-week series on sex. And I thought, any church that's willing to talk about sex for 5 weeks, I'll check that out. Because it was so far removed from what I grew up in. I mean, Church of Christ, you don't even talk about dancing, much less sex. So, and
Which one leads to the other?
exactly. And then before you know it, you're co-ed swimming, so be careful. It's scary, I know. So I checked out one of the sermons online because it was the week before the same-sex series, or the same-sex talk, which was the last talk of that 5-week series. And I came into Gateway scared to death that I was going to hear them say that being gay was wrong. I was scared to death that I was going to hear them say that being gay was right. And I even wrote John an email before I came and just said, I'm coming. And I'm scared, and I don't know what you'll say, but I hope you say the right thing because I need something. And the series did the one thing that I needed, which was speak hope. And I saw people up on stage give their testimony of God bringing healing, and I, for the first time in my life, saw a story of multiple people saying, you know what, God has brought freedom. Because I knew in my heart, I knew it was wrong. I knew that life was wrong. But I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix me. So Gateway provided me the relational space to ask the questions inside that I needed to allow me to look into things with God and find some of the answers that I needed. But from the outset, I heard hope, and I heard permission to question. And those were two things out of the gate that I needed.
Sarah?
I haven't heard your testimony yet until just now, and you rock. Wow, that's awesome. Coincidentally, that was the same exact series that I came to when I first started coming to Gateway. That's weird.
Really?
Coincidence. Crazy. My name is Sarah. Quick little bit about me. I was raised in a different faith. I was raised Muslim, born to a Jordanian father and an English mother, and there was a lot of domestic abuse in my household. My parents were separated, and I was raised by my father, and a lot of physical and emotional abuse. And had a lot of emotional issues growing up, and it wasn't until my sophomore year at A&M that it really caught up with me, and I developed a very deep, deep depression. I struggled a lot with depression. It was my identity for a long time, and it became so bad that I ended up dropping out of college for a semester and got even worse, thinking I can do something to make it better. I can heal myself. I can do it. Didn't have any God to worship or love at that point. And one thing led to another. I became mute. I was so depressed that I couldn't even talk. And things got worse after that. You run out of solutions and options when going through that battle, and I decided that I would kill myself. 5 years ago, it took a lot of medication and attempted suicide. And I'm here today, so it didn't work. But
Thank God.
During that night, I, in the hospital, cried out for something, and I felt this overwhelming presence of grief, and turned out to be God's Spirit. Led me here to Gateway 2 weeks after that incident. Got baptized here, and can say that I'm healed, and I'm very happy to be alive.
It's awesome. TJ?
Well, I apologize up front if you see me making funny faces or wincing. I've got a bruised kidney and 4 broken ribs right now, and John owes me. I told him.
You're always making excuses.
John told me, hey, I told John you owe me because I didn't take the painkiller so I could be a little more coherent. So he's taking me out to a fine steak dinner.
I will.
In a few days. So for me, I was a guy who came out of the culture. I mean, kind of quintessential in a way. I grew up not from a church family, actually kind of what you would expect, a broken home, a absent father, a father who got addicted to heroin, and so I was pretty much orphaned. Even though he was physically there, I was orphaned at about 5, 6 years old, and so that life led to many things that I'm obviously going to fast forward through, but what that resulted in is a young man who was walking around believing that he was ugly, that he would never have what it took in this life, that he's not worthy unless others say that he is, and that nobody really loves or cares about him. And I pretty much lived my young adult life and an adult life believing those lies about myself. So that created this very insecure little boy in a man's body. And what's fascinating is, I think y'all probably heard of the term false self. If you knew me, you would think I'm like, man, Mr. Confident, whatnot, but really I was just putting on this false self to manage what was going on inside. And so, but God was never really involved in my life at all. If anything, I kind of made fun of him. I used to make fun of guys who came from, what is it called, the youth camp, the YMCA thing. And me and my friends would make fun of them. And so I grew up very much like, Jesus who, whatever. But then I met my now wife, and I brought in this broken little boy into our relationship. And her broken little girl that we brought in just really created this volatile relationship where our brokenness was just out of whack, you know. And she heard a radio ad on the radio for Gateway. And so Renee, my wife, she was more of a prodigal daughter. So she grew up in the church, whatnot, but she left in college. And so she started hearing God's voice calling her back. And she started going to Gateway, and she started inviting me, and I was like, whatever, you can do whatever you want. I'm not interested. Well, finally, because really I worshiped her, not God. I got all my self-worth from her. I finally gave in and said, okay, I'll go with you. And I remember the first time I went, I was so, the guy with his arms crossed, Mr. Defensive. And ironically, where we used to meet, not this building, but the last one, it was a Jewish synagogue. So
This was slow in the beginning. I began serving in the arts department and on the production team, and served for about a year before really ever pursuing Christ or really knowing where to start. And I was very quiet the whole time. What started to ignite things for me was the Soul Revolution, the 60-60. I don't know if you talked about that today. Are y'all familiar with 60-60? So
how to abide in Christ, basically how to walk in the power of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, connecting to Him moment by moment. So we'd have this app every 60 minutes. Your timer would go off, and there'd be some scripture. So it really taught you how to connect with God, and to really make Him your foundation. So that was where I really started to grow in faith, was during the 60-60. I will say what prevented me from growing more is when I did get pushes and kind of kicks to do something, to take a leadership role, or to invite somebody to coffee, and I was scared and didn't because I thought that I wasn't cut out for it, that it wasn't right for me. But every time I did follow those little nudges, a lot of beautiful fruit has grown from that. So I'm now in a process where I fully know that there's nothing that I can do to manipulate someone's heart. There's nothing that I can do in serving in a group or getting a small group together that will change, that it's God who works on their hearts. And there's an opportunity for Him to work through us if we let it be. But knowing that it's God's doing, not mine, takes a lot of the pressure off. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah, for me, it was two things for sure. Just getting my feet wet and serving. I started out on the parking team. I mean, I didn't know any better. That was the first opportunity I saw. So through serving and just meeting other volunteers and just having small talk, it's a very easy way in to start having community and start having meaningful conversations. But certainly, two groups. The first group I ever part of was a couples group. That was significant, but maybe more significant was a men's group that I got invited into that was more of a very intensive, like, hey, you're getting invited in because you're displaying willingness to grow, and like this is the place where we're holding each other accountable, and it's a high bar. But we went through the disciplines, and mind you, I didn't know anything about disciplines, church, any kind of spiritual disciplines, and with that community focused on such a foundational thing, such as the spiritual disciplines, that's where I remember my wife, who was by all accounts maybe a teenager in the faith, and I'm just this infant, on the teat. I'll tell you what, man, that milk that I started getting from that teat in that group that got me going. And I remember Renee at one point goes, bam, there you go. Oh, hey, yeah, just make a connection. All right, high five. Nice. If you didn't know, that is actually from Meet the Parents. So I remember my wife at one point, several months into this group, she said, I don't know what's going on in that group, but I want some of that. Just because she saw me go from this infant to like really maturing and getting, spiritual hair in places that I didn't have.
TJ,
And so,
TJ, Jesus used metaphors, but
hey,
change them a bit.
Very, very accurate. So, I think I answered the question.
Well, so I just wanted you just to get a little glimpse, that it's all over the place, but God really does do an amazing work in people still, right? So, yeah, here Melissa is that person maybe you're scared of, but you got nothing to be scared of, And here's someone who grew up Muslim. Well, you wouldn't think there's any chance she's going to come to your faith in your church. And here's a guy who made jokes about Christians all his life. But you know what they all have in common? They're just like you. They're just like me. And when we just treat people like humans who all get lost and hurt and broken and wander from God and God's will, and we create that space, and then we have a process. We have a way that they can take steps relationally and then lead our leaders well where they really help people grow. And then before you know it, help them take risks pretty early on to serve others and to even start building into others. And that wave keeps growing. And then, what you're doing in worship and what you're doing together, it creates, this momentum. So, thank you guys so much for being willing to share your stories. Appreciate it. Oh, almost.
You're
nailed
good.
your ribs.
No.
All right, we gonna take a little break or
No break. We're going to push through. You guys ready to push through? Hey, let's thank those three again. Sarah, TJ, Melissa. So grateful. So what I want to do, we're going to actually spend the next hour in Q&A. And again, we have a 2.5-hour break. Now, I'm actually going to encourage you to try to get back closer to 7. Remember, bring this so you can get your book right away. It's going to be a great night, Artist and Soul tonight. But what I want to do is just point out a few things in here, some resources to take with you. First, this page that says Gateway Leadership Initiative Webinars. Let me point out, these are free for you because you're here today. These are free for you. We have a code you guys are going to put up on the wall, I think. And you'll see that here in a moment. But while they're finding that, let me find Rick and Craig. These two guys, if you're unfamiliar with Gateway Leaders Initiative, find these two if you want to be part of what we're doing in church planting. Thank you guys very much. Give these two a hand. They've worked really hard. One lives in San Diego, one lives in Sacramento, but they're part of what we're doing globally with church planting. So Gateway Leadership Initiative webinars. These 3 topics use this Gen Sum 14, not dim sum, Gen Sum 14, and you get free access to these conversations, these webinars that are coming up. Also, something helpful, if you have a small group that you want to help move from being inward to outward focused, as John just talked, Mud and the Masterpiece, the action guide, walking through this together with your group moves them towards action. And it's a really great resource for you. You can get right outside. Church Planter, Cultivate. This is a 9-month experience where you will get mentored. It's a 9-month experience. It's fantastic. Church Planter, Cultivate. Find these two to find out about that. Church Planter Profiles. Every day, 10 church planters from around the world take advantage of this assessment. 10 a day. There are 100 agencies using Gateway Leadership Initiative in this Church Planter Profile. So be sure to take a look at that as well. And then we mentioned it earlier, but I want to say it again. We need you to be a guest blogger, to create the material that we're helping other churches with Come As You Are, communities with Come As You Are leaders. So visit today, asyouare.org, and let us know how you are seeing God do some amazing things in your context. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with Sam, right? Sam, we're going to lead off the Q&A. So taking everything you've heard today, let's spend this next hour together with John and Erwin. So Sam, tell us your question.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say thank you guys for having this. Has been amazing. We really enjoyed it. So my question was, it's very obvious that you guys put a lot of effort and focus and energy and resources towards being attractional and missional as a church. So how do you balance that, like with your staff and your resources, energy, your balance, your focus as you lead your church to be both very missional but very attractional at the same time? Or do you see those as the same thing?
That's not really my language. I don't know. I'm not on.
Oh, you're not on? I have never liked those categories because I think they're false categories. I mean, and yeah, and it's got to be both, right? I mean, Jesus was incredibly attractional. People just were, it was like a magnet to him, but he also went out to them. And so I think there's a both and. By that, do you mean what you do on a Sunday service versus trying to mobilize people out? Right. Okay. Well, when in our Sunday service, all right, so I'll do my little pitch here about Sunday services. I think coming together as a church, corporate worship, inviting God to be here among us together, and unity and vision and catalyzing culture, all that can happen. Transcendent moments. I mean, God can use art and creativity, or, like a movie clip that TJ could relate to. Many times we'll do a song that's in the culture that brings up a spiritual question. They can connect to it. Sometimes it's in worship and people just don't get it. What's going on? Why do I feel this way? So there are lots of things and that can happen in a gathering, in a Sunday service. And I think we've got to think about not just those who are already in, but those who are coming too. So we try to think about both. But like I said before, I don't really think about it as two separate groups of people, those who don't believe and those who do. I think about it more like we're all humans and none of us fully trust Jesus yet. And some of us can take a first step of trust, others need to take a next step of trust. So kind of leveling the playing field and realizing we're all broken, we're all addicted to self at the root, and we need to let God be God. But what I would say as well is the Sunday service can only do so much. And I think in North American Christianity, we think that a Sunday service can do it all. Like it can disciple people, it can spiritually form people. So I'm going to teach through God's word and you're going to know the full counsel of God. If I were just doing church for me, I'd actually do it that way because I love that. I think, though, it doesn't work. And here's why. Because if you get people to come every single Sunday of the year and you teach for about 30 minutes and you go right through God's word, right? They're getting about 20 to 25 hours of teaching a year. You know how many hours of TV they get a year? At least 1,000. Who is really spiritually forming them, right? So if we're really talking about spiritual formation, a weekend service is never going to do it. It can catalyze culture. It can inspire next steps. It can help people start to see God and see what he wants for them. but we need to help them take a next step into relationship. And like TJ finally got, where you learn discipline so that you start to become a self-feeder and you're in his word in a daily kind of way. You're walking by the Spirit like Sarah talked about, in a moment by moment kind of way, right? And you're in confessional community, like Melissa talked about, because that's really where God forms us. So I think it's a false dichotomy, thinking it's one or the other. We need both. You wanna?
Sounds great.
Oh,
Yeah. and,
all right. Next
yeah,
question.
I was just trying to imagine what a church that was trying to be unattractive would look like. and I saw a lot of doctrinal teaching, and about the Trinity and things that don't make anybody's life better. And so I'm going.
You saw that?
In my head, yeah.
Oh,
I was seeing that. I was going, most churches don't have to worry about being overly attractive. I'm just saying, it just seems to me like,
That's not a fear, you mean, that you're going to be too attractional?
yeah, I'm not too worried about being overly attractive, I guess the question is, like, who are you trying to be attractive to? Right? Because if I'm trying to understand that word attractional a little bit. I feel like there's laser beam and Enterprise is like bringing up the shuttle. And so there's a sense where I'm wondering, who are you attracting? Are you, because beyond Christian and non-Christian, are you attracting hopeful people? Are you attracting people who are bitter and angry?
Or what are you getting them attracted to?
Yeah.
I think that's where. Just because I came from Willow, we got labeled a lot. Oh, you're a seeker church. And I just hated that
But you weren't labeled. That's what you guys said.
Huh? I never said that.
You were at Willow, so the corporate confession is yours until you leave. and,
I did leave.
no.
But the thing I didn't...
But you're saying you got labeled. But you didn't get labeled. That was your label. You guys were awesome at focusing on unbelievers and reaching them.
Well, what I was trying to say is that label, I think, was a false label.
Here.
I think, yeah.
He's talking about here. You're talking about there.
Oh, you're saying here you got labeled at.
Yeah.
I thought you meant there. I said,
No,
you didn't get
no.
labeled there. That's what you guys said.
Yeah. No. I'm talking about when I was blown away. I don't know if you guys even remember this, but I don't know, Bill said something, and everybody just jumped on. Bill repents of being seeker targeted.
Yeah, I heard something like that. I think I told him to stop repenting. And
Well, it's like, okay, first of all, I don't think he did, but secondly, that was that stereotype.
Yeah.
That of creating something that's trying to just wow people. So attractional, and that's where the attractional versus missional whole thing started, right? Is the idea that, you're just trying to put on a show to attract people to the show. To which I would say, well, why would you do that? We're not going to compete with Hollywood. What are we trying to do? If you're going to do that, go try to make good films or be a good band or...
So what is missional then?
Huh?
Like, what is missional as opposed to attractional?
Well, it's the idea, since you haven't been in Christian culture in so long, it's the idea that Sunday, and this is where it is a misnomer, I think, for both Gateway and Mosaic, that because Sundays is a great, safe place to bring people, that it's just about Sundays. And missional is the folks that say it shouldn't be about Sundays, it should be about what we're doing in community during the week. So together as a small group, it's really the house church versus the big church.
How's it working for them?
Well, we're both attractional and missional.
Oh,
Or as I would like to say, we're biblical. So that I know what you're saying, but you'll have to ask those folks that have switched to that.
Yeah, because like a lot of people I met, when they would ask me that, they're not very effective at reaching anyone. And that may be just my cursory outside observation. I may be missing nuances that are much more scintillating. And but a lot of churches are attractional at reaching Christians,
Right.
You know, and that doesn't change the game at all. And then a lot of people are missional about reaching no one. And that doesn't change the game either, you know?
right.
And that's why I'm like, I think that the moment you have to take on a moniker, you're probably not good at it.
Well, and that's the other thing is, you know, you and I both have lived through a lot of the Christian buzzword stuff. I mean, in the 90s, if you're not doing Gen X ministry, you're missing the boat. You're not on the cutting edge. And then before you know it, no, it's not Gen X, it's postmodern ministry. And then, you know, then it's, it's seeker targeted or it's purpose driven. And if you're doing, you know, then it's emerging. And if you're doing postmodern ministry, you're late 90s, man. We're emerging. And then emerging became emergent. And it's like, not that. And, you know. and now it's missional, right? And I think the missional conversation is an improvement, quite honestly, because at least it's thinking about out there. But just like what Erwin was saying, I think where we miss it is that's all about us and whether we're good or not, quite honestly. Like when we get in all those conversations, like, well, am I doing it right? Tell me. Should I be missional? Should I be attractional? What? Tell me.
Yeah, I think 20 years ago, it was like incarnational. But what's the other option than being incarnational? Like you're not present on earth? You know, I'm like, it's all so confusing to me, you know?
Well, and that's why I do think what we have in common, I think what we have in common in this is think about the people. Don't think about other Christians and what they're doing or not doing, whether you're on the cutting edge or not. Think about the people.
Yeah, I think we're like relational. You know, we like people. We make friendships. They seem to like us. They become really attracted to the Jesus in us. And they become followers of Jesus, and then they think it's changed their life, so they want their friends to know. But it's very relational.
The gospel's relational.
Seems to me like it's supposed to transmit human to human. But hey, if a church can be immensely attractive and reach the world for Jesus, I'm for that.
Well, and you're very, I think both of our services are pretty creative and speak musically in the language. You guys write a lot of music. You were just looking at some kind of dance thing you're going to do this weekend, and
yeah, because I had.
So
this
let's
image,
talk about that.
Yeah, I just had this image of paint drops dropping from the sky, and I said, wouldn't it be cool if the paint drops dropped, and then when they bounced up, they were dancers, and they were like dancing ballet, you know, and so they were trying to create that image and so the paint drops are the color of the cover of my book, incidentally. And, you know, as we begin this, you know, continue the series, Artisan Soul. But for me, it's like, I don't think about us being attractional. I just think about us being beautiful. You know, we just have a value for aesthetics. And we think textures are beautiful, and aromas and flavors are beautiful, and that humans are designed for beauty. And so I would never want, even in our house, like my wife's cooking a meal, I mean, it's beautiful. It's always a work of art. You know, and that's just if it's just 5 people, and she would probably say it's incredibly attractive, you know, and so I don't think that being compelling and attractive and beautiful is a factor of size, and neither do I think that mission can only be effective when you're small. I think a lot of times we create ideologies as a contrast to something we can't do effectively. You know, and so if we're not good at a particular approach, we say it's wrong. And then we create a different approach that we're better at, and we say this is biblical. And I just think that Rick Warren and Bill Hybels are more gifted than me. You know, I'm just like, I'm okay. Like, they're more gifted in a particular approach and effect in the world, and I celebrate that.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there are people who are just more gifted at reaching people in the context of their home cooking meals. They're just better than me at it. And I don't want to create a theology that makes what they do less just because they're better than me.
Yeah, because we serve an incredibly diverse God
Yeah,
who
and
uses
I don't
all
want-
kinds of diversity.
Do you really want the world to be lowered to the ceiling of your talent? You know, and I mean, people are all the time going, well, you know, we keep our groups down to like 30 or 50 or 10. And that's the biblical model. I go, that's the biblical model if you only have people who can only reach 10 people. But what's going to happen if you accidentally reach someone who's like the Apostle Paul?
At number 11.
You know? And he's like bringing in 50, 60 people at a time, or you reach a D.L. Moody to Christ, and he just keeps bringing you 100 more people every week. And you're say, stop. You know, you're destroying our missional model. you know? And what about if you're just not as compelling as she is? But when she talks, 250 people want to show up at the cafe, and she can't help it. Every time she moves, more people show up. And you can tell her, no, that's not the way Jesus wants you to do it. You need to accept the socialist view of human talent, where we all meet each other at the bottom rather than celebrate each other at our best.
Let's talk about that for a second. And other questions too, but empowering leaders and the gifts of the body.
Yeah, I always said about Eric, and I meant it as a compliment, although I now realize, Eric, that it might have sounded like it wasn't. And I said Eric has never been limited by his talent or lack of talent. And
You actually said,
I know, I'm trying to fix it.
you said, you're really good at working with people who are more talented than you are.
That's
That is
a
a
great
compliment.
compliment.
But I meant it as one of the greatest compliments in the world, because I always felt that was like my talent. Like, but you were just more talented at it than me. You know? And you could work. Eric had just like no ego need.
That's really true, though.
Yeah.
Eric goes about, you know, he's in our whole South Central, and he just goes about breathing life and belief into people, and they rise up.
Yeah, 'cause
And,
honestly,
yeah.
right, if you put him down, like if you break him down, like chemically, you're like,
I've never tried to do that.
You're an engineer.
How'd you do that?
it's like, you go, this productivity should not come out of you.
Once again, I take that as a
Yeah,
compliment.
But you have like this intangible essence where people both like you and trust you. And then you have no ego need. You let people rise to their highest level of capacity. And you just rock. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you know, I've always just been amazed. I think if more people could just people want to access visible talent rather than visible talent. They want to like access the person who's clearly like he's a power leader. They don't want to go, how does this guy keep changing the world? Well, and he just seems to be like celebrating people. And I miss that about you, by the way. And
Thank you for letting them come here.
I didn't let him. I'm still bitter. But I think a lot of it is like missional. If the missional community is that the small approach is the biblical way, the ceiling is that you believe everyone has your level of talent. But if you believe that God has people with extraordinary capacities, then you should identify that, celebrate that, and unleash that. Mm-hmm. You know, and I mean, our team is just, and I mean, even with my internal team, I used to have an assistant who always say, there's 3 ways of organizing your filing system. And she goes, let me sit down and explain to you. System 1, System 2, System 3, I was already blurred out. You know? And then when she was done, she goes, so which system would you prefer? And I said, which system would you recommend? And that was my way of saying, I have no idea what you just said, you know? She said, oh, System 2 is clearly the best. And I said, well, let's go with System 2. She goes, excellent decision. And then I said, but I'd like you to do one more thing. And she said, what? I said, I never want you to ask me any question like that again. All right, when it comes to anything like that, you're my boss. You just walk in and you tell me what I need to do. And stop pretending that you know less than me. It'll make me feel better. It'll make you feel better. We'll operate better. You just tell me how the world should run. And I feel like that's the dilemma. Maybe that's the thing. Attractional churches, if I understand this thing, tend to over-focus on the talents of one person,
Maybe that's it.
and without unleashing the talents of the whole. And I think missional churches tend to undervalue the human potential in that small group
To do something bigger.
to do something bigger.
Might be.
You know, and so I'm all
That's
about.
not an either or.
Yeah, to me, I'm all about unlocking God-given human capacity and maximizing the good that can be done in the world.
And I think as leaders, you know, you've got to think about that. How do we see what God sees in these different people? And they're all different parts of his body, and they have different roles to play. And so how do we encourage and envision and impassion, you know, empower them and release them? Like, you know, I think about Brian and Amy. They were serving coffee. What a tragedy if that's all they did, serve coffee, when they had the ability to create this thing, you know, where hundreds of people find belonging and find faith and find dignity, and, you know, or, you know, your daughter, who has an incredible ability, obviously, to lead artists and musicians. And
Yeah, my 22-year-old girl, she's a powerhouse. I mean, she has talent oozing off of her body, and she is a brilliant leader. Doesn't mean she doesn't have issues, because she, you know, she likes taking territory. She does. I mean, every email is, why can't I take over this area too? Yeah, I mean, literally. I don't think I'm exaggerating. Right, Lawrence?
Dear God, I'm abstaining from this conversation.
And I keep emailing her, texting her, going, why do you want this other area as well? She goes, because I can lead them better. And it's hard because she can. But I'm like, you got to let other people play too. You know, there are enough toys for everyone.
let's take some other questions.
Back there?
Back here.
I wanted to come back to the generational discussion. So one of the interesting things is we've been preparing and praying with some families around the plant that we're about to go to in more of that urban center, that hard place. It was interesting because one of the topics we brought up is, are we ready to pray 3 generations of our families as well as 3 generations of the families we're about to go minister to? Are we willing to commit that before God? And it was interesting as Erwin was talking about, are you in, are you out, and how much time we spend. We're finding a few are willing to make that generational commitment to do something culturally transformative. Many have this bewildered look and almost deer in a headlight. How long do you mature or help people to kind of come along and get that sense of generation? Because it kind of blows the mind of the average Christian, I've found. I'm just curious how you've nurtured that in those discussions.
I'm sorry, tell me your name.
Scott?
Scott, I'm going to be real honest. I don't understand your question.
Just asking about you had mentioned the generation. You asked a group of your people, do you want to move to Hollywood? We can make I think a cultural transformation.
Oh, yeah. Okay, got it.
And what struck me when you said that was, well, those are probably people that have walked with you for years.
Yeah.
As a planter, what I'm trying to figure out is, how do I get people to catch that same vision? And so you also mentioned, if you find somebody that's apathetic or just doesn't get it, let them go, find the ones that are passionate. I'm just seeking to understand, how do you nurture, or even how much time do you give somebody to maybe process that concept of general or cultural or generation and cultural transformation, just to kind of get your sense. Is it a instant on, they get it, they don't, or do I take some time to nurture it? So just seeking to get a bit more clarification.
You're going to give the more compassionate answer. No, I'm actually very compassionate, aren't I, Lawrence? Aren't I not merciful? Literally, one of my favorite lines in any movie is the line when Joaquin Phoenix says in Gladiator, "Am I not merciful?" And, I love that line. I used it with my children as I raised them. I don't know if it worked, but what are we talking about? Oh, yeah, generation. I think
Are you talking about commitment?
Well, it's kind of asking the families to you're bringing your children downtown.
Yeah, you
and a lot of
shouldn't have-
people aren't willing
But
to
you
do
really
that.
shouldn't have that problem when you're planting a church. Because when you're planting a church, it's like new people who are there with new vision. And
I guess the idea was to go back to Nehemiah's concept, right? Of I may bring the 10th% with me, right? A group that could go in and begin to have the resource, the provision, and absolutely to John's point, of 100 core, that's what your church is going to look like. 90% of them going to be from the local. We're still trying to find some that might be able to come in and have at least the foundation that could sustain the church. So we're trying to just find that balance.
Well,
trying to bring both comments together to.
Yeah.
I understood.
Yeah, we didn't have that. It didn't work out so well. So I had about 10 people moving from Chicago until we actually moved. And then it was me and my wife. And like I said, I knew, I did end up having one staff member that I'd hired there ended up coming 6 months later to Austin. But so we just started from scratch, building relationships. But we have planted churches with core groups. And what we've said to them is, you need to take your core group through a process of really understanding what this commitment is and what it's going to cost. And you really probably need to do everything you can to scare them away. And get them to commit. Like even when we planted our South Campus and when we're doing other campuses, we asked for that core group to make a commitment and sign something about serving with their gifts, developing others spiritually, giving to that, to that plant, and a time commitment. Like a year to 2-year time commitment, and we ask them to sign on the dotted line, and we make it really clear to them, if you bail, it hurts. It's not just about you. So don't sign casually. If you don't have that, then you really do have dead weight, and that's not a good thing. I mean, if you're going along and you're just kind of appeasing them and saying, "Oh, it's gonna be great," because they're gonna give, but they really don't know what they're in for, you're not gonna have that money or them, and they're gonna cause problems as well. That's been my experience.
Yeah, it's a tough question because anyone you have to convince, you don't really want them on your team, because you're gonna spend so much energy every week trying to convince them that what they're sacrificing to do. Everyone who feels compelled by
You're talking about Christians coming from another church.
Coming from their church. It's like, I know you need their money, and let's just be honest, you need their money, right? And sometimes you just need like bodies in the room until you fill it with real humans. It's like, just come and pretend, that you're here. But then they bring such a morose environment a lot of times that they're just not enthusiastic and passionate about what's going on, that it's worse. I would just be, go ahead.
I really like your thought of if those people don't have any non-Christian friends, don't even think they get it.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant.
I think the best way to start a church is to start like having cookouts in your backyard. Inviting people to eat with you, talk and dream, enjoy life, and I was talking about earlier the Hank Lehman said, I just really believe in this like tribe concept, that your passions are supposed to be reflective in the people who are with you, and then you don't have to convince them, they want to go with you, and there's a sense where a church planner and a pioneer has to be a person who's going to go alone or with someone, because in Christianity, at least in America, the money is with the late adopters. Very few early adopters are the resource point for the church. I mean, I've gotten very little funding over my life for ideas I've had. My favorite moment was like when Fred Smith, Fred from Leadership Network, I was asked to speak to all, I guess, like these millionaires and billionaires at their gathering thing. And we sat down at dinner, and he's introducing himself, and we're talking. And I said, Fred, we've met before. He goes, we have? And I said, yeah, 20 years ago. He goes, really? And I said, yeah, I was like 29 years old. I drove out to Tyler. We ate in a Chinese restaurant. I shared with you a vision of this community I wanted to build, and you didn't give me any money. And I said, but you gave me something that has been a gift to me all my life. And so I've waited for 20, 25 years to say thank you. He goes, what did I give you? And I said, right before you let me leave without any funding. And you said to me, it's rare to meet anyone with so much passion about anything. And I drove those 2.5 hours back going, I don't have any money, but I'm rare. I did. Thought, as long as I have passion, I will be rare. And so I told him, I said, Fred, I want you to know that
And poor.
you gave me a gift, you know? And I've like decided like all my life I want to be a fire that burns in the night. And
You know, don't you think that's such the essence of church planting,
Yeah.
but any kind of like Christian that God uses to change the world is you got to have, you really, I mean, it really is what the scripture says. You have to have your sights set on an eternal kingdom.
Yeah.
And you just got to go, hey, I might flame out big. And if I am going to flame out, I'm going to try big because it's not going to matter in 100 years anyway. It's just not.
Yeah.
And so you push through, you go for it.
the coolest thing is that about a year ago, Fred wrote an article on
Do you guys know who Fred Smith is? Like, didn't he start FedEx or something like that?
Leadership Network.
No. Fred
No.
Smith?
I don't remember.
I think
I
he
don't
started
know.
FedEx.
I didn't know.
You don't even know.
I don't know. Someone sent me out there and said he might fund you, and he didn't. And, and he wrote this article that said, I love it when I'm wrong. And he wrote this article about meeting me 20 years before.
Oh, that's awesome.
And,
Wow.
and you know, to me, it's like, there's some sense where what you do should be incredulous to everyone else. And part of your job is like just to prove everybody wrong, that God is in this stupid thing.
And you know, well,
know?
that's another thing. I mean, rejection. That's a big one, right? Like, Bob Buford didn't fund me.
He didn't fund me either.
Yeah. You know, and I had a lot of meetings with people who said, you know, be warm, be filled.
Yeah.
And you do.
Yeah.
You keep trying, don't
I
you?
had many meetings with Leadership Network and Bob and all them, and nothing happened in my way. And you know what? I love the fact that there are some ideas that are just one step ahead of the culture, and they can be funded.
Yeah.
There's some that are 5 or 10 steps ahead of the culture, and there is no funding to be found except in the harvest. The only people who ever be grateful for that idea and that endeavor are the people whose lives are forever changed by it. And I think that's just I like that space. Like, we just got notice that, you know, we're basically going to be homeless, you know, from our property in a few years. And I knew I was about to go to this meeting, and I said, I think we're going to be told we don't have our space anymore for thousands.
For Mosaic.
For Mosaic, for thousands of people. And my wife said to me before I went to the meeting, remember, crisis is where you shine. This is what you're good at. And I looked and I said, I know. And, and I said I'm almost like my adrenaline is like on overload. And when we didn't get kicked out right away, there was like a huge, you could feel it, right? My huge disappointment. So I went in and I moved all of our families anyway, created a crisis. And I said, it's time to relocate, guys. And I went to all of our families with kids and said, you know, and there was like a nervousness that the families wouldn't go. But they all just picked up their swords and said, let's go. I said, we can reach more of our friends there. We can, you know. And we have a culture now that people, what they're afraid of is being left behind in the less relevant thing. When you say, Lawrence? Yeah, our culture is, wait a minute. Is that the edge? And are you like keeping us in the middle? Are you pioneering and you're not telling us? And so I got to go. It was like edges over there. They just move. And they move in the thousands. And you can have a movement of people who want to be a part of what God is creating, not what he has created. It is possible, guys.
That's great. We have a question back here.
It's kind of a functional question, kind of sharpening down to something. How are we as a church, as we're reaching these people, you know, let's say, if statistics are correct, like 1 in 3 women are abused, really in the church and in the world. what I saw at the last church I was in was as they would come to follow Christ, then the abuser would follow them, which was often their husband. How can we protect the abused as well as help the abuser?
Yeah, I'm leaving that one for John. And yeah, no, that's a great question, bro. It's an important one.
You know, it does set up all kinds of lies in the abused and the abuser's heads, and Satan uses it against them. And you know, one of the beautiful things that that we saw in the emerging of Gateway was that almost all our ministries were started by people who were broken in some area. God used it to bring them to faith. We encouraged them as they grew to use both their gifts and their story, and they started ministries out of their own brokenness. So we had a bunch of women who had been sexually abused or abused in different ways, and they grew, found healing, then turned around and started what originally was our Comfort and Hope ministry to women who had been abused sexually. And ended up using, over time, some of Dan Allender's stuff, which is really good, Wounded Heart, and some other stuff like that. And along the way, we have also dealt with the abusers. It's an interesting thing, you know. In fact, I can't think of any abusers who weren't abused as well. And so there is, you know, it's kind of the way evil works. You know, evil preys on the innocent and uses those who are broken and addicted to inflict evil, and then seeds lies into their psyche that gets them to turn around and create the same monster that they hated. It's amazing. But I've seen it over and over and over again. And so, you know, sometimes what it takes is showing them that. And, you know, it's like any other addiction, though. You usually have to hit rock bottom. And then you need to have a path for them to go down. And that doesn't always have to be something you've created. It can be resources, you know, where people are dealing with anger issues, or it could be, you know, an AA group even, where they just work through with others who are being honest about what they're addicted to. But I think you do have to realize they're going to be there, and you need to have a path and a way forward. That's what we've seen anyway.
That's good. We have time for one more. Yep.
Thank you. You were talking about being on the forefront of what's happening in culture and in society, and sometimes you're pitching ideas that other people don't get. What do you see the future being in terms of cultural shifts and city shifts that churches and pastors and visionaries and creatives need to think about for 5 and 10 years away?
Yeah, I think for me, that's why after 6 years I wrote The Artisan Soul. And I think that the future is a new anthropology where every human being is understood as an artist and as a creative. I think as we're moving away from the final shadows of the Industrial Revolution, the views of standardization and conformity will be rejected readily. I also think there's an interesting counterwave where scientific atheism has come to the conclusion that the universe is deterministic, and that all human action is actually mathematical propositions, and so that free will, creativity, and of course spirituality are illusions. And so that we stand at the epicenter of a really critical moment where atheism says everything is predetermined and that free will and creativity are illusions. And it's a great moment to actually say that's what is reality if there is no God. But if there is a God, then he's the creative who created us creatively, and that we're actually all artisans. And then you have this third wave of Buddhism that has a very comfortable space between the intersection of creativity and spirituality that Christianity does not. And so I do think in 50, maybe, I used to say 100, but now I'm going to keep pulling back. In 20 years, the idea that human beings create the future will no longer be heresy in the church. It'll be normative in the church. In 20 years, the idea that every human being is a creative will not be seen as an obscure conversation. It'll be normative in the church. And the only institutions that will survive effectively in the future are the ones who begin to work in the field of human imagination and creativity. From child development all the way through adult life development. And so I wrote The Artisan Soul because I felt like it was time we needed a manifesto for human creativity and a new theology and a new anthropology for who we are as human beings, how we engage the creative act and how the future is ushered in. And I know it even affects in some sense our view of eschatology, and even though I try to avoid every ology out there, I actually am a theologian. I just hide it. But when someone asked me, when is Jesus going to make a new world? This was in New Zealand. I said, every one of us is created out of earth. We are earth. And when we are a new creation, we actually are the Terra Nova, the new earth. And so, however you understand time and space, I live in the new earth. Because I am the new earth. You live in an old earth. It's time for you to join me in the future. And so when I look at the scriptures, I do think there's the future is going to be in this arena of human imagination, creativity, and artistry. And if the church remains deterministic, we will have no voice in the future. And if the church believes discipleship is a process of standardization, and we will have no voice in the future. But if we begin to focus on the uniqueness of every human being, and if we become the epicenter of the conversation between spirituality and creativity, the future is ours to take and to create. And for me, it's really exciting. I feel at 55 as if I'm beginning for the first time. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I was traveling across the country talking about how we're going to be a planet of cities. Before there were like this mega city movement, I was as an urbanologist talking about the move from the rural, to the urban world and the development of mega cities and the bifurcation of economic development, that we were going to lose the middle class in America and that we're going to have only the rich and the poor. And I remember, I can't remember what year it was, I was speaking to all the journalists across America in Miami, Florida, and I think either Clinton or Bush was president, and I said in the next election, all of Congress and the Senate will flip and turn upside down, and the other party will win, and I can't remember which one I said. And I had all these Christians angry with me saying it wasn't, so, I must have said the Democrats were going to win. There's so many things that are easily predictable in culture, and because there's an ebb and flow throughout society. And what Christians tend to do is after everyone else has seen a reality, we come and say, me too. And so what I want to do is
imitate in bad ways.
We imitate poorly
instead of create.
So I want to throw us ahead 20 years. And when I got myself in trouble a few years ago at Catalyst, 6 years ago when I stopped, because I said Solomon was wrong when he said there's nothing new under the sun. And I felt the reverberation of 20,000 people and wanting to throw me into the pit of hell. But I know Solomon was wrong. And I know 20 years ago in my living room, I sat with my wife. I couldn't take it anymore. I said, Solomon was wrong. Solomon was wrong. I can't keep this quiet anymore. And she said, you're going to hell. And she said, please don't ever say that outside of this living room. You're in enough trouble. You created enough problems in the world. So I didn't say anything for 10 more years. And so when I said it at Catalyst, it did not go well. And so I didn't say anything for 6 years. And then I got invited to the Leadership Summit. And they said, just create a talk. And I heard all these Christian speakers go, I'm not here to tell you anything new. I'm not here to tell you anything new. You already know this, but I'm not here to tell you anything new. And then Seth Godin got up there, a Jewish guy who's not a believer, and he said, we need to create something new. And I felt like this boulder crushed my soul, and I said, this is the dilemma. We have a language that's going to make us irrelevant, not for the future, but for the present. And so in my closing talk, I got up and I said, I'm just going to tell you, I did the exact same passage that I did 6 years before when I left. I said Solomon was wrong. And he said, there's nothing new under the sun. And I can prove to you Solomon was wrong. In fact, Solomon takes on a very Buddhist framework in that passage, talking about the redundancy of things circling over and over again back to what they were. We know that Solomon was wrong when he says that animals and humans are the same, that we all go to dust and disappear. We know he was wrong. But we don't question that. We know he's wrong when he says all we should do is eat, drink, and be merry, and then die. We know he's wrong about that. He begins by saying everything is meaningless, and everything isn't meaningless. Life is filled with meaning. But we like this one because we don't like the fact that there's something new. But in Isaiah, God said, put away the former things, do not dwell on the past. Behold, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up, but will you even be aware of it? So are you going to believe Solomon or God?
I don't think you're a heretic. I think Solomon was the first existentialist. He was looking at life under the sun.
That's right. And
God is creative. He's the essence of creativity.
And he was in the created order.
Yeah.
And when you're in the created order without God, there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
But when you become a part of the creative order, everything becomes new. New covenant, new song, new wine, new spirit, new creation, new life, new future, new heaven, new earth. It all becomes new. And I would say in the same way that the church is having a difficult time grappling with the creative process and our relationship to the future, it's because we have a wrong anthropology, not just a wrong theology. So I am hoping there's going to be a day where every child who grows up in church knows that they're unique, that they're created to create, and that their imagination is a gift from God to see a future that doesn't exist, then to usher it in.
And you know, I think what he's saying as well is when I talk about life and freedom, that's what Jesus came to give. There is this essence thing that, like I said, I think too many times we think our message is stop this, stop that, don't do this, don't do that. And who in the world, I mean, when that's the life they know, and the only life, it's not a great one, but it's all they got. Who's going to let go of that for what? And so, you know, you're really talking about seeing that the beauty of God, the essence of God, the creativity of God, the life of God, the relational love of God, and as these new churches or new communities that you're creating, you got to model that for people and inspire that in people, and that's what everybody wants to be a part of.
Yeah, so I think the future is actually more spiritual, not less. I think the future is more mystical. I think the only people who are going to have a voice are the ones who've actually met God and have a transcendent relationship with him. And I think that the era of people who give great information to grow a faith is coming to a close in our country. In the era where when people go, I think somehow this person has found God, and he's speaking out of a conversation with God. That's the future of the church. So I'm excited. I think this is a beautiful moment in human history.
Hey, this has been very, very good. Really grateful for you, too. It's been really fun to be the interpreter for the two of you. But I want to do, really, it feels like such a right moment to close. But here's what I want us to do in this moment. You've heard a lot today. And I don't want you to rush off to dinner and then come back here tonight and not just pause, just for a minute. I want us just in this space, the God of the universe wants to speak to you. Do you want to hear him? Just in this moment. Just if it's comfortable for you, close your eyes, bow your head just for a moment. I just want to create this space for you to hear what he has for you. God, we are so grateful. You love us. You gave everything for us. And the fact you bring us into your family, your tribe, and give us the skills, the heart, the ability to create community, to be part of your work in this planet. We're so grateful, God. Even in these moments, maybe not just this past minute, but throughout the day, maybe there's someone that you brought to our mind that is disconnected, that has no voice, and we're to be her voice, his voice. God, give us the courage to reach out to that neighbor, that friend, that family member. God, some of us have been cowards. Forgive us. May we have the hard conversations. Your work, your kingdom is too important, God. So God, just continue to work in our heart. Speak to us, convict us, free us to become the women and men you want us to be. Thank you, Jesus, for your love, for speaking to us through others, through the scriptures, through music, through books, through friends. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.